So some people are still filtering in, that's totally fine. Just, come on in, sit down, and be ready to listen to Holmstrom talk about Israel and Palestine and the continuing conflict that is occurring in the region. I'll tell you that Holmstrom is quite the phenomenal instructor in my experience with him. I've had, I think, 3 courses with him already, and a 4th one coming next semester, and he never ceases to amaze me, I must say. So I'll tell you that he is a retired member of the U.S. Senior Foreign Service who had recurring responsibilities for America's relationship with Israel and Palestinians. Todd was Deputy Director for Israel and Palestine Affairs in the U.S. Department of State during the at the end of the Bush administration and the beginning of the Obama administration. He was acting director of the same office at the end of the Obama administration and beginning of the Trump administration. And he was in the same position when the first Gaza war occurred in 2008-2009. He was again the director of, skipping lines here. He served concurrently as the acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs, and additionally, Todd served in various U.S. diplomatic roles throughout the Middle East, including Syria, Saudi Arabia, and even Tunisia, North Africa. And his first experience in this area was in the Senior Foreign Service in 1992 in the Sinai Peninsula. So with that, I am proud to present to you Todd Holmstrom.
Okay, thank you. And Brendan didn't introduce himself, but he's one of the key organizers here today, as well as Matthew. Matthew, and USG is our host, the undergraduate student government. And I want to start my talk by thanking them for doing this and also having the courage to put on a forum about this subject. This isn't going very well for a lot of U.S. university campuses being able to have a discussion where people do what you're supposed to do on universities, think a little bit more deeply and broadly about a complicated issue and broaden your perspective and deepen your understanding of that issue. Instead, U.S. campuses too often are degenerating into the conflict itself and being a part of it and adding to what's driving the conflict by dividing people as opposed to finding common ground that we can unite under. And so this session under USG's guidance, or the way they introduced the idea to me, is they want it to be more of a give and take, an opportunity for the students in Michigan Tech to be able to ask questions and make comments and have an informed discussion about what's happening. A lot of the people who are on news media who are commenting about this know very little about it and have less understanding about what's really driving the conflict. It is complicated, it is historical, and it's not easy to engage with it in a way that doesn't set people off. Even the title of this talk today, could be viewed by some parties as picking sides. The name Israel and Palestine, a lot of Israelis are going to react very badly to that. Israel exists in law and fact. Palestine is something that's aspirational. The United States has long had a policy of a two-state solution to the conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians, and that would be an Israel and a Palestine living side by side in peace and security. That reality has never been able to be realized up until today. So, every word, every comment, everything you say has meaning to both sides of this conflict, and you can unwittingly, alienate people and anger them by how you talk and engage on the subject with the best of intentions. So I'll give you a few comments to start us off, and then really, the hope is that this will be more of a discussion and give and take, and question and answer and comments as well. It's not a lecture. I'm happy to talk about this in the lecture format, and we'll give the course title Gaza, Gaza next semester. But this is a forum for students and the community to talk about this issue, hopefully in a way that we can all go away with a better feeling, not only understanding of it, but also a better feeling for how we can be all part of a path forward that doesn't include war or, continuing conflict, a way to get past the conflict and get to peace. So to start us off, I'll give you my answer to two different questions. Before I do that, just to orient you a little bit to what the area we're talking about. This is Israel and its surrounding countries, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and the Gaza Strip, where the current war is going on, is right here, a tiny little speck of land. It's 25 miles long and 6 miles across at its widest spot. Often referred to as one of the most densely populated pieces of ground in the world. And you can see where it fits into the larger Middle East there. So my two questions are one, why would Hamas do this? This is the music festival they attacked, one of 22 targets on 7 October, and do this, killing large numbers of people, the vast majority of whom were civilians. This is a kibbutz, and you can see when they knew it would result in this. Why would you do that when you knew it would result in this and this in Gaza and this and this? Hamas fought, this is the 5th war Hamas is fighting with Israel. And every one of them, after they initiated a conflict, Israel struck back with overwhelming force. So there was no ambiguity in the minds of Hamas what would happen when they did their attack on October 7th. Then my second question is, why would Israel do this when they knew it would result in this and this? This is one Arab capital, but there are many others. I showed you European capitals first, and this. So to start with my first question, why would Hamas do what they did? Hamas decided it was going to flip the paradigm in the Middle East and the world as far as their issue. And their issue was conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And they saw that conflict moving past them. They were marginalized, they were forgotten, they were outside of the narrative revolving around Middle East peace. And they decided to hijack that and become the center of that narrative. Inside that first picture I showed you, there was Gaza and there was the West Bank and there was Israel in between the two of them. People also refer to those two areas as the Palestinian territories. Some people refer to them as the occupied territories. If there were to be a two-state solution, it would be those two areas that would make up, the basis of a Palestinian state. So this is the West Bank, and those are settlements, Israeli settlements in the background. And those settlements since the 1970s have been expanding across the West Bank. And under the current government in Israel, which is often referred to as the most right-wing government to exist in Israel's history, also with ministers that are part of this religious nationalist movement that drives the settler movement, the restraints, whatever restraints there have been on the settlement movement, were being perceived as being withdrawn. And the settler movement's intent is to make a two-state solution impossible, because they would occupy enough of the West Bank that there would never be a possibility of a viable Palestinian state to ever exist. And they're very strategic about where they place their settlements and their outposts that become settlements. And, that any type of Palestinian territory that's remaining is fragmented and not viable. And the settler movement was becoming increasingly aggressive as well. He says a picture of Israeli soldiers stopping settlers. This is, I think, a group of what's called the Hilltop Youth. There's extremists on both sides of the conflict, and the extremists now, post-October 7th, are in ascendancy on both sides of the conflict. The Hilltop Youth are trying to go into a Palestinian area, and it's Israeli soldiers who are stopping them in this picture. And here's a picture of some settlers who are shooting at Palestinians living in the West Bank. So from Hamas's perspective, they're trying to show themselves as the protectors of these people in the West Bank, as well as, Gaza. And then outside of what's happening in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza, in the larger region, the region was moving past Hamas and also the Palestinians. This is a signing of the Abraham Accords, a couple of the peace agreements. There were a couple that followed this, the UAE and Sudan. And the Abraham Accords were Arab countries making peace agreements with Israel before the Palestinians had a peace agreement with Israel. And this is one of the final points of leverage the Palestinians had on Israel. It's always been an asymmetrical peace negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. But one of the strengths, one of the leverage points that the Palestinians have historically had are the Arab countries. Israel couldn't become an integrated part, an accepted part of the region by making peace with Arab countries until they made peace with the Palestinians. And that paradigm was shifting. Arab countries were making peace with Israel before Israel made any peace or concessions to the Palestinians, other than some small ones. And this was moving to a decisive point with the Saudis, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, having very intense and getting close to final negotiations to become, part of the Abraham Accords and making a final peace agreement with the Israelis. That was the end of a key point of leverage for the Palestinians in their own bilateral negotiations. And then Hamas probably made a miscalculation as well. They looked at the mass protests that have been occurring in Israel for the last 6-7 months, and they viewed that as a point of weakness. like any autocratic, closed, dictatorial system, when they see protests occurring in other countries, they view it as a sign of weakness and vulnerability. As an American, I would view that as a point of strength. That's a show of vitality and strength, the public rising up, and they're all at ownership of governance, and they're all participating, and they're all saying, we're going to define our own political future. But the Hamas, who suppresses and oppresses any type of political dissent in Gaza, which, they rule, that looks like weakness. And the fact that that's going on and continuing to go on, it looks like the Israelis are politically divided and socially divided as well. So that also made it, a more opportune time to conduct this. And then finally, Hamas isn't a monolith. There's different parts to Hamas. There's a political wing to Hamas. There's ideology to Hamas. There's a social movement aspect to Hamas. But there's also a military aspect to Hamas. And it's the warriors, the war fighters, the killers, the terrorists that are in ascendancy in Hamas right now. Yahya Sinwar, meet him in a dark alley. My best advice is get out of his way and hope he's having a good mood, because it won't end well for you otherwise. 1988, he was a street enforcer for Hamas in Gaza, and he was arrested and convicted by the Israelis, not for killing Israelis, for killing Palestinians. He's called the Butcher of Khan Yunis, which is the area of Gaza he's from. He spent 22 years in an Israeli jail, and he used that time to learn everything he could about his enemy, like any good soldier would. He learned Hebrew, he studied the society, and he thought as a result he came out radicalized, as most people who go to jail become more radicalized. He was radicalized going in, he came out even more determined, and he thought with more capability to do what needed to be done to advance his cause. So they're the political people, the social movement people, they're there, they're talking, and they're representing what Hamas's goals and perspectives are. But it's this guy and his ilk that are calling the shots for Hamas. Put that together, that's why, October 7th happened the way he did, the way in time it did. So the Israeli side of it, why would the Israelis, go into Gaza? Israel had occupied Gaza since the 6-Day War in the 60s, and then they unilaterally withdrew from Gaza because the occupation was unsustainable, and it was also, there was no end to it. And so they pulled out. And, for that settler movement I showed you on, earlier in the talk, Israel removed all its settlements from Gaza. So it's not like it couldn't happen again, but it unilaterally withdrew, and it left the Palestinian Authority in charge in Gaza. The Palestinian Authority is the governing authority created under the Oslo Peace Accords in the 1990s to govern a future Palestinian state. The PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, is the entity that's internationally recognized as representing the Palestinians internationally. They are the most important force within the PA, but in 2007, Hamas killed its political opponents and through a bloody coup took over Gaza and became the de facto power in Gaza. And, as I said, Israel fought 5 wars. This is the 5th war with Hamas since that time, and every one of them were inconclusive. At the end of it, Israel always tried to reestablish deterrence, and they thought at the end of the last one in 2021, that Hamas had finally gotten it. That Hamas leadership realized they couldn't beat Israel, and so it was best for them to try and invest in governance inside Gaza and try and improve the economy and the day-to-day life of the Gazans. October 7th proved that that assumption was absolutely false. It also was a shock to the Israelis because it also proved that the IDF, the most powerful military in the Middle East, couldn't keep them safe from arguably their weakest enemy. Hamas, Israel lives in a very difficult neighborhood surrounded by enemies, and of those enemies, Hamas is probably the weakest. And Hamas killed more Israelis, on 7 October than had died since the Holocaust. It was a shock to Israelis. That sense of security and so forth was destroyed over, in one day. And, 237 currently hostages were taken by Hamas back into Gaza. And, this is, that haunts the Israeli psyche.
Oh my God, too.
Yahya Sinwar got out of jail after 22 years in a prisoner exchange for one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, 2011. And over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners were released in exchange for that one Israeli soldier. Now they have, 237 Israeli hostages. Imagine the political pressure on a country that has the same policy as the U.S. We won't negotiate with hostage takers because if you give them what they want, you encourage more hostage taking. If they have the same policy as we do, and just like them, we violate our policy as well. When the political pressure on the government is enough to make them do that, and so all of a sudden Hamas has this hold, these Israeli hostages, and the Israeli society, it reminds them of a daily. So not only does it destroy the sense of security of Israelis, but it also attacks the foundational tenet of Israel. Israel was founded on an idea of never again. In the okay, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I was hoping to hear a little bit more about the historical context, like what you're talking about right now, with the formation of Israel, specifically the Balfour Declaration in 1917.
Yeah.
And maybe like a synopsis of the history up until then to kind of frame the picture. We're hearing a lot about like what's happening right now, but I would like a little bit deeper historical context.
Yeah, okay. All right, so, there's a couple of things that are pointed to as sort of milestones in this conflict. And the Balfour, Declaration might be one of them. At the, during World War I, the British Prime Minister writes a letter to a leading Jewish family, the Rothschilds in England, and he says, we're committed to seeing a future where where Jews may be able to return to a place they've historically had connections to. Now, that's taken in the narrative, and both sides of this conflict have narratives, and they're long-running narratives. And if you know one side of the narrative, and you believe it, then it's easy to see what the solution is to this conflict. We're right, and they're wrong. And those narratives are built on a lot of historical facts. And, the key is, I think, as an American, to try and consider both narratives and also look at it from an American perspective as well. So after 1917, at the end of World War I, there was a peace conference in Paris, and the U.S. was represented by President Wilson, and the idea was to give national self-determination to all these countries that formerly were part of colonial empires. And what is currently Israel and the West Bank and Gaza was part of the Ottoman Empire. And at the end of that, there was the League of Nations, and Great Britain was given a mandate to govern and transition what was called the Palestine Mandate into an independent country. And that's never happened. And the British had a lot of trouble in the area because there was violence between the two groups, and they couldn't find a solution to that conflict that both sides would agree to. And so they tried to control immigration from Europe and Jewish immigration into their mandate, and they also tried to figure out a way to exit their mandate. And they had a lot of different ideas and so forth, but one of the ideas was the idea that is still foundational to what the international community wants to see, and that was the Peel Commission's report, which said there should be two states. There should be an Israel for Jews, and there should be a Palestine for the Palestinians. And that never came to be. And during World War II, the Brits tried to still stop Jewish immigration into their mandate. In fact, they would turn back boatloads of Jews that were trying to land. And some of those boatloads went back to Europe, and those people were killed in the Holocaust. So in any case, Zionism, which is talked about as a driving force with the idea of Jews who had been historically persecuted all over the world, how do you deal with them? And there were lots of different ideas. One was you integrate into the societies you live in. And Jews tried that. Some Jews in Europe they didn't even have any sense of Jewish identity anymore. They were French or whatever nationality they had. But in the Holocaust, they were still identified by their host country and by the Nazis as Jews, and they were killed in the Holocaust. So that didn't work. And Zionism was the idea that you create a Jewish state, and that's how you can stop another Holocaust from ever happening again. And in 1947, the UN General Assembly, building on that British idea, passed a resolution that said there should be two states. And the Jews who were part of that community in the Palestinian Mandate accepted that, and the Palestinians rejected it along with other Arabs. And when the Jews declared independence or the Israeli state in 1948, they were attacked by 5 Arab armies, including irregular Palestinian forces. And they fought them all off to a standstill. And it validated this idea that if you have a Jewish state, maybe you can protect the Jewish people from another Holocaust. Does that answer your question a little bit? Without going?
Yeah.
Please.
Just getting into some of the things. Thank you.
All right, what do you say about the Israeli use of white phosphorus on schools and hospitals in the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, okay, well, there's lots of allegations on
course they're
both
not.
sides. And some of the allegations against Israeli military action is that, they're violating rules of war, right?
And there.
And, yours might be one example of, okay, go ahead.
Are you denying that they're violating rules of war?
Okay, well, this is what I'll say about rules of war. There are clear violations of rules of war, which there's no ambiguity and there's no debate on. What Hamas did on October 7th is a clear violation of laws of war. They went out and they attacked civilians and they killed them brutally, and they videotaped it. So it's not like there's not like there's ambiguity on that.
2/3 of the casualties that day were military personnel, and there's
Not 2/3.
testimonial Israeli citizens saying that there was crossfire between Hamas when they were taking hostages, and tanks were still blowing up the houses with the hostages inside.
Yeah, okay, so Hamas denies that it killed civilians or targeted civilians, right?
I'm not saying they didn't.
No,
I'm
okay.
saying that Israel targeted their own citizens too, so they definitely added to that death toll.
Okay, as somebody who's, gone into combat, I can tell you, there's a significant difference between what Hamas did and what the IDF did.
Please explain.
Okay, I'll give you an explanation. Hamas went out with the intent to kill as many people as possible. That was their priority. And if they're civilians or military, if they could kill more civilians than military, then they would do that.
Was that announced, or are you just assuming?
No, I'm not assuming. That's what Hamas did. That's what Hamas had, and you're right. When you have a war and you have a conflict, there's gonna be conflicting evidence on both sides. With Hamas, it's not, it's not gray, it's clear. They went out there and they documented themselves. It's not like, they were trying, they went out and they had GoCam cameras on themselves. They took, their victims' cameras and uploaded on it. So I'm not trying to, debate with you the fine points of the law of war, because it's not a fine point, it's a clear point. Hamas went out to target civilians, and they subsequently, their political leadership that wasn't part of the decision-making process, subsequently disclaims all that. Others who purposefully target civilians like Russia and Ukraine also try and deny the fact that they do that. But Hamas,
talking about Russia.
and Hamas is also a designated terrorist organization.
By who?
By the United States and a lot of European
Which is the
countries and
only
others.
country in the world that doesn't recognize Palestine as a country. So I mean,
The US isn't the only
Easy,
country
right?
that doesn't recognize Palestine as a country. The US is one of many countries that don't
Not
recognize
really.
Palestine. Yeah, it's
It's
true.
just a very
There's
small
almost
list.
the equivalent amount of countries that recognize Israel as Palestine.
how many
So
embassies have left Israel since the beginning of the conflict? Like 6, 7, I think. Is that growing in support of Israel, or?
Well, that's why I told you, the protests are something that Israel had to realize was going to happen when it went into Gaza. And you interrupted me at a point when I was trying to explain why Israel nonetheless went into Gaza.
I'm just not seeing any of your points going anywhere. It's,
Well, I know, I'm not going to reinforce one narrative and one side of it. I'm good.
I'm trying to get
give
to the
both
facts,
sides of it.
that's all.
Well, what you're trying to do, I think, is support one side of a narrative. I'm trying to give you both sides of the narrative. And it's that type of thing that breaks down the ability to have a discussion of this. And this is an academic discussion. This is a university discussion. This
Sounds
isn't
like
a political,
propaganda.
this isn't a political rally. It's not ideological.
Not
thing.
at
It's
all.
not-
Sounds like propaganda.
Well, okay, because I don't have your narrative.
Well, it's not my narrative.
Well,
I'm
it
just
is
trying to
your
get to the
narrative,
facts here,
because
man.
you have one side of the story. I'm trying to tell you both sides of the story. So, I won't give you satisfaction with validating your perspective on it. The other side for Israel, and I'll come back to you guys, I don't want us to go down into a rat hole of, saying I have this ideological view of it, or I have one view of this conflict, and that's the only right view. There are two views to this conflict. And I don't agree that there's moral equivalency between Hamas and the IDF. There isn't. There is moral equivalency between Israelis and Palestinians. I agree emphatically that is true. Both the Palestinians and the Israelis have moral equivalency. Hamas is not the representative of the Palestinians, the PLO is. They're not the governing authority, the Palestinian Authority is. And Arab and Islamic states gathered in Riyadh this week and both agreed that international concept is still true. That the Palestinian authorities is, the Palestinian Liberation Authority is the international representative of the Palestinians, and the Palestinian Authority is the governing entity. So Hamas is neither of those. Hamas is an illegal entity, and it's Arab and Israeli countries that are saying it. The Arab League and the OIC both announced that this week. The other side for Israel is, this is a bad, historical analogies always break down, and this one is incredibly imperfect. But, 9/11, the US, if you lived through 9/11, as I lived through 9/11, 9/11.
Oh boy.
Okay, goodbye. You don't wanna.
Sir, your narrative is very dangerous for all of us, okay? You don't put the historical background of the Nakba, of the Naksa, of all the massacre that the Israel occupiers do to the Palestinians. This is very dangerous.
No, it's not true at all. And it's not, okay, it's much dangerous that I wanna talk about the facts. If you wanna talk about the facts, I'm happy to talk about it.
Facts are, kids dying every 10 minutes due to the IDF.
Well, okay, all right.
Palestinian children are dying every 10 minutes.
Yeah, and that's, see, you're showing why it's so tough to resolve this conflict.
Because there is no resolution.
1.5 million Palestinians
Like that.
are displaced without food, power,
They
and
just
water.
walked out.
My question to
They're
you,
not
what solution do you have to problem for 1.5 million displaced Palestinians without food, water, electricity,
Yeah, all right.
losing hospitals?
Okay,
68 hospitals bombed.
Ask
Right.
Hamas.
yeah.
Ask the IDF.
That's the IDF.
Yeah, okay, well, here's the thing, you want me to break down on this discussion because you don't want me to set the framework for it. And you don't want me to set the framework for it because you want it to be about
I'm asking you to
people,
prompt a solution.
children dying. And the reality is children die in conflict. It's horrible, it's wrong, and the conflict should end. So more children don't die, and the question is, how do you end the conflict? And that's what I'm here to talk about. How do you end the conflict?
actually, the
And you
one
don't
thing-
go to conflict by walking out, and you don't end the conflict by calling names, and you
Just
don't end
to
the
correct something
conflict.
that you said, you mentioned that Hamas is not the legitimate representative of the people
That's
in
right.
Gaza.
That's right.
Wholly incorrect.
That's absolutely,
Netanyahu,
that's absolutely.
Netanyahu supported the Hamas movement so as to divide the Palestinians, weaken them, and grab more land. Netanyahu supported Hamas. This is documented and well known. So you cannot say that Hamas did not represent the people.
Wow,
They did
okay.
represent the people.
Okay, Hamas does not represent the people. Hamas won an election in.
They won the election.
They won 44% of a parliamentary election in 2006. What election have they allowed in Gaza since then? And they haven't. And in 2006, when you win 44% of a parliamentary election, what do you get? You get an opportunity to work with